Hey world, what up? Chris Broussard, the one who's been on the Brooklyn Nets for the whole season, pretty much is in a position with the NBA landscape of having the Brooklyn Nets as the overwhelming favorites to win this year's NBA championship. We have seen a side of the spectrum to where some media pundits and NBA fans are dismissing the Brooklyn Nets even from coming out of the Eastern Conference due to the Philadelphia 76ers, which is inconsistent in the NBA landscape. Let's be real. The Brooklyn Nets have a quote unquote super team with Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant, and as well as bringing in veteran players off the bench such as Blake Griffin, Mike James, and so on and so forth for this franchise. And if we're looking within the Brooklyn Nets, those three players, barring any injury, and if they're healthy throughout the whole playoffs tenure, should be overwhelming favorites to win the NBA championship. And resulting in any losses with any of these rounds, especially to the Lakers in the finals, will result in a taint into Kevin Durant's legacy. I won't put it too much on Kyrie Irving, but Kevin Durant will have to be the hierarchy of that. James Harden, of course, will have to be second in line because even though on my position, James Harden is the impact player for winning games for this team, Kevin Durant is still the quote-unquote best player on the Brooklyn Nets and should have the most responsibility and blame, if anything. Now, my position, and I've been consistent with this, I do expect the Brooklyn Nets, ever since they obtained James Harden, they should be in the NBA Finals. They should be. The Brooklyn Nets are going to have to take on within the first round either the Washington Wizards or the Boston Celtics. I fully expect the Celtics to go against the Brooklyn Nets, even though the Washington Wizards do have the momentum entering in these last 20 games with winning around 15 out of 20. And with the Boston Celtics losing Jaylen Brown, I still have the Boston Celtics winning that play-in tournament. Again, it's one game, so anything could happen. So we'll leave it at that. But the Brooklyn Nets are most likely going to go against the Wizards or the Celtics in the first round. Either going to be in a max of 5 games, I suspect. In the second round, they're either going to take on the Milwaukee Bucks or the Miami Heat, which is not going to be an ideal series. It's not going to be a comfortable series whatsoever for the Brooklyn Nets if they take on the Bucks or the Miami Heat. And past that, when they get to the conference finals, I fully expect them to take on the Philadelphia 76ers, which the Sixers will have one of the easiest joy rides to the conference finals, the first time in the Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid era. Now, when the Brooklyn Nets do face off into the NBA Finals, most likely the LA Lakers, if anything, the LA Clippers. But besides from that, it's not going to be an easy outing for the Brooklyn Nets. But due to being the health of James Harden, Kyrie, and Kevin Durant, they should be overwhelming favorites either way. Let's kick it here on Undisputed with Chris Broussard, Shannon Sharp, and Skip Bayless, and kind of give our take within here. As a play-in tournament, we'll be kicking off the NBA playoffs pretty soon here.
The number 2 seed in the East, and after a long 3 months, the Nets had their big three available to play this weekend for the first time since February. KD, Harden, and Kyrie only have played 8 games together this season. But their last game together was before some of the new additions to the team, like Blake Griffin and Mike James. Chris, do you trust?
Just like last video, how we had the side characters on second take. Now this one is pretty much going to be Undisputed, the B team. So my bad on that.
KD, Kyrie, and Harden to get the Nets to the finals, despite limited games together this year?
Easily. Without any injuries, the Brooklyn Nets should be overwhelming favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference and represent the East entering the NBA Finals. They should be.
I do. And I know, look, this is going against all sorts of conventional wisdom. There's no doubt about it. To think of a team whose 3 best players, 3 stars at that, not even just 3 best players, but 3 best stars to play 8 games in the regular season and get to the finals or win a championship, a first-year coach who's never coached at any other level, and an associate head coach, Mike D'Antoni, whose lack of attention to detail has always bit him in the behind in the playoffs. I mean, I get it. I get why people...
And real quick, this asinine accusations of blaming Mike D'Antoni and James Harden, quote-unquote, folding in the playoffs, I don't want to hear that. They went against they went against the Golden State Warriors dynasty 4 out of 5 seasons. I don't want to hear that. James Harden took that team with Chris Paul to a 7-game series against the Warriors, while the self-proclaimed quote-unquote GOAT got swept in the NBA Finals. James Harden is one of the greatest players of all time, and he's a top 5 NBA player for the past 7 years or so in the NBA landscape. You got to throw credit and you got to throw respect to James Harden's name. Harden and Mike D'Antoni with Kyrie and Kevin Durant and Steve Nash, Underwell, everyone ever, they should be able to represent the Eastern Conference, let alone should be favorites to win the whole NBA championship. And I fully do expect the Brooklyn Nets, if this core 3 stays together with Kyrie, Kevin Durant, James Harden, which is going to be the case, and you still have Steve Nash and Mike D'Antoni, they're going to win a championship or two. Will this championship result this season? I don't expect that to be the case for the NBA, but yeah.
People are skeptical. All right, but if there's any year that this could happen, it's this year again, because as we talked about in the last segment, everybody's got some issues. I mean, Philadelphia has had far lesser, but some injury issues with Embiid being out, with Ben Simmons at times being out. Milwaukee obviously has its issues in the playoffs, and they're going to have their hands full in the first round with Miami. And I don't think Milwaukee or Miami has the firepower, if the Nets have all their big 3, to beat them. They can't, in my view. And so I am going with the Nets for a few reasons. Number one, when they've got the big 3, they can get an open look every time down the floor, because those 3 guys are so good at breaking down the defense that they're going to force you to double them, force you to help, and then that leaves a guy open. And if it's not Harden, Kyrie, or KD, they've got some great shooters around them in Joe Harris, in Landry Shamet. Bruce Brown has shown he can finish. Nick Claxton, obviously DeAndre Jordan, Blake Griffin. Like, they've got guys, the role players are playing.
What's the time about great shooters with DeAndre Jordan?
And well around the stars. Number 2, everybody's talking about the defense, the lack of defense. And I get it, they're not a stalwart defensive team. But they finished the year ranked 22nd in defensive efficiency. That means they picked it up. From April 1st, they were ranked.
Real quick.
th in the league defensively. Mediocre, but with that type of offense, mediocre could be good enough. It's certainly 15th. It's 30 teams in the league. That's the very definition of mediocre. And if they're mediocre on the defensive end and awesome on the first, well, they had to have time to get together, to get to know each other a little bit. But once they did that in April, 15th in the league, mediocre defense, tremendous offense, I think they can get out of the East.
And when I fully expect the Nets not to win the championship, I'm going to hear the excuses of they didn't play enough games together with the big 3, there was injuries, yada, yada. I'm preparing for those excuses to occur, which the NBA wants the NBA fans and media to pretty much proclaim on them why they didn't win the NBA championship this year.
Who have they played over that stretch when that defense suddenly got better? Here's the bottom line. Overall, it comes down to net rating. Over the last 20 years, there's only been 4 teams that have had a rating outside of the top 5 that have won a championship. The 2011 Dallas Mavericks, the 2010 Lakers, the 2006 Miami Heat, and the 2001 Lakers again. two of those teams were defending champions. They'd already demonstrated that they could play defense at a higher level than they had in that particular season. So ultimately, the Brooklyn Nets are ranked 7th right now. And for all those things you talk about when we get to their offense and their offensive firepower, the fact of the matter is they're going to have to go through some very good, some of the best defensive teams in the league. No, they're not going to have to double team all the time. They don't have any rim protection. They don't have any experience collectively together at the defensive end. And I just don't believe, look, isolation, yes. But we've seen teams that have had great isolation offensive players. The Houston Rockets you mentioned. I mean, Broussard, you gave us like all of the logical reasons why this is not going to happen at the very beginning, and then said, yeah, but you know what? I'm going the other way anyway. What I'm seeing is someone who bet on the Brooklyn Nets at the very beginning of the season and said, this is going to work in spite of everything I know about basketball, and you're not going to let go. But you're not letting go because you made your bet early and you're just going to see it through, as opposed to your head saying, you know what, I really should revise this because it's just not looking right. The development at the defensive end, the no time playing together. I mean, if the Brooklyn Nets do come out of the East, then it will be the complete...
When the Brooklyn Nets come out of the East...
AAU-ification of the NBA, because it will mean we don't need to play together. We can just get the boys and go and play in a tournament, and we can win because everybody's doing the same thing.
It's not.
No. And that's why I fully expect the Nets to fold in the NBA Finals. They're too good of a team and too overwhelming favorites to lose in the Eastern Conference, especially to a team like the Philadelphia 76ers who don't have a closer on their team. They're too young for them. The Nets will represent the East. I do expect them to fold to the LA Lakers in the NBA Finals. And the only one team, barring injury, that's fully healthy that I trust in the whole NBA playoffs, even though they're the 7th seed, is the LA Lakers. They are the defending champions. And not only from that, you do have a LeBron James who is quote-unquote healthy. And when it comes to the mental state of the game, LeBron has improved upon so. I don't trust the Brooklyn Nets to finish an NBA Finals win against the LA Lakers in a 7-game series. To win that series, I do not expect that because the Brooklyn Nets do not have a definitive alpha presence in coaching, number one, and in number two, an alpha player on their team. Now, Kyrie Irving tries to be an alpha, but on the court, he's not good enough. He's a second, third option in the NBA to win a championship. James Harden does not have a consistent, disciplined state of mind. Now, coming to the Brooklyn Nets, he has deferred upon that position of so, trying to have Kevin Durant as the number one guy. But Kevin Durant is not an alpha. He's a beta. And going against LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and the LA Lakers, and especially with an underrated professional head coach in Frank Vogel, I'll have to take the Lakers in that series. Even though the Brooklyn Nets should be overwhelming favorites with that quote-unquote super team.
Often that I agree with Rick Bucher, but Chris, he just put you in a body bag. He's right. This Nets team, we do not know what to make of them. 8 games together is laughable. And I will add this. If you look at the Vegas odds, the Nets are heavy favorites, but the team to watch is the 76ers. Their path is a cakewalk. I know the Knicks have played well. I'm a Knicks fan. Thibodeau, blah, blah, blah. The 76ers swept them this year, and Embiid missed 2 of the 3 games. The 76ers have a cushy path to the Eastern Conference Finals. Meanwhile, the Nets, who we have no idea how they're going to face adversity, okay? We know Kyrie Irving has been combustible for about the last year. James Harden hasn't really gotten through in the postseason, and now he's kind of the third wheel, but the most important player in an odd spot. And Kevin Durant is probably their best player, and I don't know how he's going to navigate the Kyrie Harden thing. There's just so many questions. Keep an eye on this Miami Heat team.
Well, number one, the Philadelphia 76ers have the most ideal pathway to the conference finals. Number one, they'll be taking on most likely the Wizards or the Celtics in the first round outing, which will be a W in their books. Second round, either the Hawks or the New York Knicks, which is going to be a W for the Philadelphia 76ers. And in the conference finals, most likely going to play the Brooklyn Nets as expected. If not the Brooklyn Nets, then the Miami Heat or the Milwaukee Bucks. But we fully expect the Brooklyn Nets to meet them in the conference finals. Number 2 in the standings, or number 2 in a point right here. If the Brooklyn Nets face anyone else than the LA Lakers in the finals, I'm going to have to take the Brooklyn Nets to win the NBA championship. I repeat myself. If the Lakers get bounced and they're not in the NBA Finals, and let's just say we have the Phoenix Suns, the Jazz, or the Clippers go against the Brooklyn Nets, I'm gonna have to take the Nets. Now, if the Lakers are somehow, some way not in the NBA Finals, I fully expect the LA Clippers to go against the Brooklyn Nets. Now, that would be a fun and ideal series to watch, to see Kevin Durant go against Kawhi Leonard and the crew. I would take the Brooklyn Nets to win that series in around 6 to 7 games, but I don't expect that to happen in the NBA landscape. I fully expect in the Battle of LA, the Lakers will represent LA and let alone the Western Conference. Now, lastly, due to the Miami Heat did fold themselves within this season. We did have injuries at the beginning of the season, let alone the Miami Heat were always playing catch-up. And they did have a 4th and 5th seed for a hot minute, but then they did drop down to a 6th seed, which they folded. They needed to get a 4th or 5th seed to play the Knicks or the Hawks in the first round. And due to that, if that would have happened, they would have had an easy first round win and win against the Philadelphia 76ers in the second round, which the Miami Heat were not, I'm not going to say they were favorites, but that one was either 50-50, but the Miami Heat had a great matchup to go against Philadelphia. Especially, they did blow out the 76ers around 2 games ago or so, somewhere in that mix. But the Miami Heat did fold. Now they're going to be on the road to go against the Milwaukee Bucks, which I'm not sure if this Milwaukee Bucks team is the same as last season. I would not be shocked if Milwaukee won that series. I'm not going to make my predictions as of yet, but who knows about that. Even if the Miami Heat do win that series, you're going to go against the Nets in the second round. But who knows? The Miami Heat, they like to be underdogs on the road like last season, so maybe they are continuing to be built this way. We'll see, to be determined.
Eric Spoelstra is the best coach in the Eastern Conference playoffs. He's proven the most for sure. Getting to the finals last year was impressive. I like Steve Nash a lot. I've coached against him at the elementary school basketball level, yes, out here in Los Angeles. I don't know how he's going to handle that locker room. And then going against Spoelstra. LeVar, the most
all year long. I trust that. Why? Because that's what I've seen. They've gone out so much where they haven't even played more than 8 games together. But they have proven that they can win without all of them being out there at one time. So there's so many unknowns that circle this Brooklyn Nets team that it's exciting to think about what the possibilities of their accomplishments could be. But to say I trust with everything that has taken place with them to this point with, mind you, a new head coach that doesn't have, any experience as a head coach, being the guy that's at the helm, I don't look at saying trust them to do it. That's too strong of a word. I think they're an intriguing team that can do it because of the amount of talent and prolific scorers that they have.
Well, we know Mike D'Antoni runs a show with James Harden, which is the case. When Harden was out, I believe they did have a losing record, somewhere in that mix. When Harden came back, they had an overwhelming impact of wins. So the Mike D'Antoni, James Harden, Houston Rockets flow of things transition to the Nets is officially a go. And that's the way the Brooklyn Nets need to play, with Harden with the ball in his hands, making decisions, and on the offensive side by having assists or scoring at will. And that can result in an NBA championship for the Brooklyn Nets. Now, if we're looking at the NBA hierarchy of things, again, I expect the Nets and the Lakers in the NBA Finals. Not too much about that. The Lakers are going to have to play the Warriors in the play-in tournament, and the sentiment is standing out there that people expect the Lakers to be bounced early. That's not the case for me. I have to see it to believe it. If that ever were to happen, it would have to happen to where LeBron's out for the season, which I doubt that's ever going to happen in that case. But overall, Brooklyn is going to have a tough outing in the second round against the Bucks or the Heat in that matter, and going on from there. So overall, I can pretty much see the excuses of why the Nets did not win the championship. And lastly, this offseason, I expect the Brooklyn Nets to really reload their team and retool in a matter to where they're going to fill in those holes. Because right now, the team is still overwhelming favorites to win the championship because you have that big 3-headed monster for those all-stars out there. But the supporting role players and the gaps are going to need to be filled out differently next season, which in next offseason, I fully expect this team to look 60% different as it is. But as for right now, I like the flow and makeup of one team only, the LA Lakers for the big picture. Second would have to be the LA Clippers to that picture alongside with the Brooklyn Nets. But then again, the Nets do have that three-headed super team monster, so who knows about it. I got Nets in the East, the Lakers. I'm still going to roll with them in the Western Conference, and we'll go from there.